Okay, let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for this day, that you continue to speak to us in a variety of ways through your word, through your spirit, through people around us, through events and circumstances, through your world and all its beauty and all its ugliness. We ask that you would open our hearts and minds and our ears and our spirits to hear your word for us this day as we study in order to become closer to you. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen. Okay. Revelation 3. I'm going to start with a, it's going to sound like an unrelated question, but it'll get related later. There are a lot of times where there are things that happened, like I think in terms of like in European history, there are things that happened 500 years ago that they continue to, it continues to shape their identity today. They just celebrated Guy Fawkes Day, and I'm trying to remember how long ago that was, but certainly in our country, we have those things too. They just tend to be a lot younger. But there are things in parts of the world where there are events that have shaped them dramatically, and certainly in the US, oftentimes if war do that. So World War I and then World War II sort of changed the world. A pandemic is doing that. So, and I think of, when Great Depression, and she called Bill's grandmother, who is still alive. She's about to be 97, and talked to her about the Great Depression, because Bill's grandmother, it's not like she was born in it and knows kind of that it was there. She remembers it. She was 5 or 6 when Black Tuesday happened. And so, she, like, her early elementary years were shaped by this very big event in history. And so there are things that I think of, my great-grand COVID, because there's not going to be that many people who remember it. And so anyway, so the question is that I want us to just share on is, what are some events in like the distant history of your family or your church, your community, that continue to shape your life today?
When you say distant, how far back are you talking?
As far back as you want to go.
Yeah, national events that are
Yeah, national events are fine too. Just like, there's things where there's sort of points where everybody remembers like where they were and what they were doing, but we're also looking for things that kind of change our orientation towards the world, or continue to affect, our sense of identity today.
Not quite sure if it's what you were looking for, but I know that like when I was 9, we went to Christmas in Florida with my grandparents, and we never went back to Ohio, and that kind of changed. We became sort of Southern at that time, so
yeah,
that definitely continues to shape my family's history, I guess.
Yeah.
I think, as far as events in history, and the whole 9/11 was, I think, my generation's, where I was at type of thing. But
yeah, people can tell you obviously where they were when JFK was shot. I can tell you where I was when the Challenger exploded, and those sorts of things. I was thinking, I'm thinking back just in my own family. We have this sort of mischievous sense of humor. And so this kind of just, so for example, there are stories about my great-grandfather who they would, when he was a little boy, they'd be outside during church, because the kids would kind of go play right around the steps to the church, and they'd be outside during church. And I can't remember why, but one day there was this group of dogs that hung out there too. And so they took the dogs and they shaved their backs, and then they poured alcohol on their backs, and then they opened the back doors to the church during worship. And so these dogs went tearing down through the hallway or the aisleway and causing all kinds of chaos and disruption. And then they hid all the evidence and just sat there and acted like they didn't know what was going on. And my father, when he was little or younger and he was in high school, one time there was a science teacher, she had a thing of flowers on her desk, and they took the water out and replaced it with ammonia. And then they kept coming up and talking about how nice her flowers smell. And eventually she leaned over and took a big sniff, and, or the school was up on like a crawl space type thing. And in the science room, there was a big, like a grate in the center of the floor, so that they could, if something spilled in a lab, they could wash it down and it would just drop to the ground underneath the school. And because the EPA didn't care about anything then, but they would take roll, and my dad would be here, and then the teacher would turn around to start teaching, and my dad would slip through the grate under the school, come out, walk back in the door, and knock on the door. And so the teacher would come to the door, and then no idea how he was getting out. He did this multiple times. So got suspended a few times too. But that kind of mischief sort of runs in the family. I have a very mild version of it, and it's usually verbal and not physical. But we have this. I mean, there's lots of gag gift giving and traditions like that. And so that certainly shapes us. I see it in Liam now that he's getting older, that kind of same sort of like, it's not going to really hurt anybody, but I'm going to kind of push the envelope and see, I'm going to do something funny and see if I get away with it. So yeah. But anyway, that's just sort of this, and it goes way back, apparently. You got any, George?
I'm sitting here thinking, and I can remember a lot of events, but nothing seemed to change my life. I guess I'm too stubborn for it or something.
Well, I think sometimes too, things, when they change the world around us, they change our lives too, but not necessarily in a way where we would go, oh, that, because it's everybody around us is sort of operating differently too. So anyway, okay, so we're going to read. I'm going to share my screen. Wait, I don't think it's up. Hang on. Let me open the thing I want to share first, and close the 8 billion other tabs that are open on my laptop screen. Okay. I'm that person. I have like 18 things sitting on my desktop. So go share screen. Here we go. We've got Revelation 3. So does anyone, and just a reminder, this is the continuation of the letters to the 7 churches. This time we're doing Sardis and Philadelphia and Laodicea. So does anyone want to read verses 1 through 6?
I will. And that's what's up there right now, right?
Yes.
And to the angel of the church in Sardis write, these are the words of him who has the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know your works. You have a name of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen what remains and is on the point of death. For I have not found your work perfect in the sight of my God. Remember then what you have received and heard. Obey it and repent. If you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what hour I will come to you. You still have a few persons in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. If you conquer, you will be clothed like them in white robes, and I will not blot your name out of the book of life. I will confess your name before my Father and before his angels. Let anyone who has an ear to listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
Thank you, Peter. So the first question I'm going to ask is just kind of a reading comprehension question, which is, what are the charges against the church in Sardis?
This may be an interpretation, but I get they're asleep at the wheel kind of thing, or dead.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, actually. That's not an interpretation. It's just a more colloquial way of saying what the end of verse 1 says. There's this line, it's verse 2, and it's the end. It says, for I've not found your works perfect in the sight of my God. Perfect means something different in the Bible than it means in modern English. In the Bible, when something is perfect, it's complete. So when we're being perfected, as they talk about that, we're continually being perfected in Christ. What it means is we are made more and more whole, not, nicer and shinier necessarily. And so what John is really saying here is, or what John says Jesus is saying here, what Jesus is saying is, I've not found your works to be complete. Your works are incomplete in the sight of God. And so what do you think that means?
Well, it sounds sort of like you need to go out and earn yourself some grace. I say that tongue in cheek, but that's what it sounds like.
I go back, I think, to, and I see that I was, as I was reading over this, I was like, a lot of this sounds like works righteousness. And I don't think that that's what it means. And some of it's translation. But going off of what Peter said, and I didn't think of this until Peter said it, and then I asked the next question. That sort of asleep at the wheel. What I think that Jesus is saying here, and these are definitely not the words Jesus would say it in, but the church in Sardis is half-assing it. Like, they're going through the motions, but they're not really doing what they know they need to be doing. Because I see that in verse 3, remember what you have received and heard. Like, hey, you know what you're supposed to be doing, do it. It's sort of like when my children come to me and they aren't getting great grades, and then I go look and it's because they have 18 missing assignments, and I'm like, you're supposed to do your schoolwork, do it. So yeah, that's kind of what I kind of hear is this, you all know what you're supposed to be doing. Like, let's get with the program. But that's kind of what I see. And again, I had not connected the end of 2 to the end of 1 until you said that, Peter. And then I went, oh, it's related. Imagine that.
The other thing that comes to my mind is like and I'm sure, I think it's somewhere in the Beatitudes or Sermon on the Mount where I think Jesus said, do not do your works in front of others. I wonder if it might be that type of thing, maybe too.
Yeah.
But phoning it in, HAing it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're phoning it in basically. Because Jesus is saying, hey, wake up. Like, y'all can do better than this. This is a little bit of context and history. So the people in Sardis, like we know things in our past history, knew well they remembered 600 years prior to this, like before Christianity, right? So 600 years before Christianity, the city had been for a long time unbreachable, like because of where it's located on, like there's a sheer cliff, right? And so to breach the city, you have to, like they can see you coming from miles away. It's almost impregnable just because of geographic location. But 600 years ago, the Persian army surprised them and ended up taking the city because someone managed to get someone managed to get up that sheer cliff and launch a surprise attack. And nobody was expecting it. And so it became even more devastating. And Cyrus, the Persian, who shows up in other biblical stories in the New Testament as well, conquered Sardis in 550 or so BC, which was like, that was something, it was like 9/11, like they would never forget that. They would always remember that. And it was still an important city, but it was sort of like this lesson learned, like, wait a minute, we're not as special as we think we are, kind of thing. Where that comes out though is when Jesus comes in to remind them of that. Where is it? Oh, so that verse, it's the second half of verse 3. If you do not wake up, I will come to you like a thief, and you'll not know what hour I will come to you, is sort of going, hey, this happened to you all once before, 600 years ago. Don't get so complacent that you think it can't happen again. So a sort of reminding them of that lesson. And so the question then is, how might we today as Christians heed the call to wake up and strengthen what remains our own works, what we have, before it's not too late? I don't like that phrase, too late, but you know, what does it take for us to, because it's never too late in the gospel, right? Like Jesus, it's never too late for Jesus, but you know, where are we being called perhaps to wake up and strengthen what remains of our own works, our own living? A better way to ask that might be, well, first, a better way to get there might first be to think of what are areas in your life where you might be phoning it in, not constantly, but you know, areas in your faith in your life where you might be phoning it in, and then you know, how can you heed the call to strengthen what remains?
Well, I'm not sure on the second part, but I'll just kind of be transparent and
Mm-hmm.
say my prayer life could definitely use some improvement. I guess it's do it more.
I think that's an area where a lot of us um, can be tempted to phone it in and succumb to that. I think sort of the wake up calls that I've gotten in my life, certainly the the relatively recent ones that have caused me to go, wait a minute, like how did I get here, right? Like what was going on that got me into this place or this time or this, whatever, this practice, right? Like what got me here? Okay, what do I need to do? Not only to get out, but to not get there again. Like what do I need to do? And for me, at least in the recent events, it was I needed to do a whole lot of self-searching and self-critique, but not in a beat yourself up kind of way. Really critical analyzing of, and then a lot of soul searching about who was I, who am I, who do I want to be, and how do I do that in ways that honor others, but also honor myself. Like, how can I be true to myself in ways that also honor other people? Whereas before, I think I had been so concerned with serving other people that I had been drawn into doing so in ways that compromised my values, if that makes any sense. That I was sort of giving pieces of me away. And eventually there was going to be nothing left. So. George, do you have anything?
I don't know. I've struggled a little bit with all these messages to the church, just to be frankly. So I've just been trying to hang in there and see when it congeals. But in respect to your latest question there, I think what my experience has been, and in the last year, serving people is one thing, mm-hmm. but caring for them in a way that they need to be cared for is more than just taking care of them.
That's.
I came to realize that, I think I took as good of care of Sandra as anyone could by taking care of her illness and her medical needs and so forth. But she really needed some things that I wasn't doing. And I've given a lot of thought to that in the last year. Mm-hmm. Some of the soft things, as today's language would say.
I think that's a really important designation. Thank you for bringing that up. The difference between serving someone and caring for them. And there's a place for both. But I think even when we serve, even if we're serving somebody we don't know, we can still care for them. And how do we care for people we don't know? And then even more so, how do we care for the people we do? Sometimes it's easier to care for the people we don't know.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent point.
Well, it might be easier to serve those we don't know.
Yeah.
I think for me, it might be more difficult to care for the people that I don't know. It's easier to serve them than it is to care for them sometimes.
Yeah. So What would you say the difference between just serving someone and caring for them is, George?
Well, serving them, by that I mean the words kind of get tricky here.
Yeah.
I know what I mean, but I'm not sure I'm expressing it well. But serving them is, feeding them and
Mhm.
bathing them and doing those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And caring for them is a more internal,
Mhm.
looking at not what I think they need, but what they seem to be, what they seem to be feeling, what their feelings are about what they would like, as opposed necessarily to what they need.
Mhm.
And I don't mean, when I say things they would like, I don't mean excesses. I just mean,
Yeah.
Just some real person to person type
Mhm.
interaction, as opposed to material caring.
Mhm. I'm thinking about that in terms of the reason I ask is it's an easy, not easy, but it's a more intuitive thing to see when we're talking about somebody we know.
Yeah.
And I'm just out loud thinking through like the difference when it's somebody we don't know, and kind of going in a couple different directions in terms of outcome. Like, so I'm thinking, we are called as Christians to feed the hungry and clothe the naked, like to take care of the poor. And we can do food drives, and we can go drop them off, and they're going to get fed, and that's going to be a good thing, and that's serving. Um, and I'm wondering if, a couple of things, one of which is caring looks like actually seeing them as a human being and not someone who just needs, not a thing that needs food, like not an object of our benefaction type thing. This is a real human being. And what is it like to live when you don't know where your next meal is coming from? And then if I truly do care about you, so that's one way, it's like on an individual level. The other way is sort of, if I care for you, I can serve you by giving you food. But if I care for you, perhaps I might engage in actions that help to make sure that you aren't, that help to correct the things that got somebody to a point where they can't feed, they can't, whatever it is, because a lot of times once people get stuck in a cycle of poverty, they're stuck. It's really hard to get out of it. And so taking a look back, okay, how do I participate in systems and live in ways that contribute to systems that sort of push people into that poverty, or even if they don't push them, don't give them a way out. And so, if I care about those people, what do I need to be doing differently in my life? And what actions do I need to be taking besides giving them food to help them break out of that cycle, to sort of, it's the difference, I think, between, what am I looking for? The opposite of justice, I don't think, is injustice. I think it's disenfranchisement, maybe. And so we've got these people who are kind of disenfranchised, and how do we, what's just for them isn't to keep them on the margins by just continuing to give them food. It's to work to restore them to community. I don't know.
Yeah.
Those are just my random thoughts.
This is not, I've been thinking this, and it's not a real crisp response to that, but carrying some food down to a homeless shelter is one thing. Going and sitting with the sick in the hospital, not a close relative, but
Yep.
maybe you do or maybe not even know them, but just giving them some of your time and some of your person
Mhm.
is more
Yep.
the contrast that I'm making.
Yeah. Or even on a closer level, you can take food down to the homeless shelter and drop it off or help cook it or drop it on their plate. It's the people that go sit with them while they eat,
Yes.
rather than just, I'm in the serving line, I've done what I was supposed to do, here you are, here's your food, you're welcome. And actually sit down and get to know them as human beings.
Yeah, that is the kind of thing that I was
Yeah,
trying to get to.
no, that's a really, really good point. Certainly is going to help me reflect on how I serve. And do I do
mean,
so in ways that care for people?
that's harder for me than
Yeah,
the other.
yeah, I would agree. It's harder for me too. I think it's harder for many of us. Okay, so let's move on to verses 7 through 13. I'm trying to get it to come up. Peter, we might need to look at our internet Wi-Fi business down here. I'm breaking up and things are not operating very smoothly on my end. So does anyone want to read 7 to 13, and I'll tap it up when we get down to 13 or near to 13?
And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, these are the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Look, I have set before you an open door which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are due. Let me start over on that.
Okay.
I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews, but are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word of patience and endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial. That is from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast to what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. If you conquer, I lost you there. Let me catch you up.
Sorry, you're on 12.
Okay. If you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of God, and you will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
So what does Jesus praise the church in Philadelphia for?
I saw patient endurance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was it.
There's it up in verse 8. It's kind of convoluted, but where it talks about they have little power, but they've also kept the word and kept Jesus' word and not denied his name. I think, I think that my little cheat sheet says verses 8 and 10, so that probably covers it, since that's where those are. So, in the letter to Smyrna, which we got last week, there was this other referent to the synagogue of Satan, and the throne of Satan. And so this isn't anti-Judaism. This is about what kind of Jewish practices, or what, it's sort of like when we examine Christian practices and we say, hey, maybe that's not, not okay. Or, there are denominations or sects, and we say, or cults sometimes, and we say, not okay. Like, that's not what it means. That's not what so anyway. So there are people in the synagogue community. This isn't the whole of the Jewish population, but there are certain factions within the synagogue community that were using the civic status of the synagogue. So the respect of the synagogue as a part of the civic community in the town, in the city, whatever, to block the advance of the message about Jesus. So this is basically the commingling of government and religion. And in this case, it's the synagogue co-opting the government to enforce a certain view of religion. So the question is, and we're not even, well, we can actually address this, because I had a whole conversation with somebody and witnessed a conversation online that was not acrimonious. It was just, it brought this up. So why did some Jews find the message of Jesus to be very Jewish and others find it to be challenging to the Jewish faith?
I ask you to repeat that one more time, please, Christy.
So why did some Jews find the message of Jesus to be very Jewish and others find it to be challenging to the Jewish faith? I'm going to give you a hint. This is a process question, not a content question.
Okay.
So we're not looking for specific things that Jews were like, hey, that's not Jewish, or like we're not looking for specific teachings of Jesus that people were debating were Jewish or not Jews. We're sort of looking at how were the Jews at that time processing what was going on, and Jesus' ministry and the ministry of his disciples, and his message. How were they processing that in ways that, like, some of them were processing it in ways that found the message of Jesus to be very Jewish, to be starts with a C, cohesive, congruent, to be very congruent with Jewish belief and thought, and that others processed it as a challenge to the Jewish faith. And so it's sort of like, why do we think that happens?
Under that particular context, or
Either.
Well, I mean, my immediate thoughts go to, I could see, all the references in the Old Testament that Jesus talked about for him being the Messiah is very, very Jewish, I would say. I've heard some very interesting conversations from Messianic Jews. I thought that's always an interesting context. But I also could see you no longer have to follow all the laws exactly as we laid out, and that's going to tip off my status and my whatever from a religious leader perspective. So I could see particularly in the leadership would think that, that's not good for us. But
that's certainly part of it. That's a good observation there. got anything, George?
No, I don't think I've got anything on that.
Okay. I was thinking, and I'll just tell you this ahead of time. I do the research on the context and the various, I read it through to find where the weird metaphors or analogies are, where I go, what the heck does that mean? Ahead of time, and to, figure out what questions we're going to answer in what order and stuff. I don't answer them for myself. That happens on the fly in here, just like you all. So what I was thinking about as I read this question, and especially listened to Peter about this, is I think there were people, I imagine there were people in that day, just like in this day, who had a very, very set, very black and white view of the world and their faith. Things were right or they were wrong. These were the rules. You had to follow them. This is what you did or didn't do. And when somebody offers a different interpretation, when that's your security, because people put their security in their sets of beliefs, when that's your security and somebody offers something that maybe says, hey, what about this gray area? Or you're confronted with a gray area, or somebody says, there might be, you're certainly over here looking at A or B, hey, there's a way C, like there's another way. And that can get very threatening to people, because some of it's a question of identity. Their identity is wrapped up in this huge part, which it is for many of us, people of faith. Our identity is wrapped up in that. So it can be a challenge to their identity and their sense of security. And, because if this is the way it works, then I understand how the world is going to work and how I fit into it. And it's, to some degree, it's about having a sense of control. Like, okay, if I just do these things, we're good. And so I know what to do. I know what I need to do. I know what I need to not do. I know where the lines are, all of that. And then I think Jesus' ministry, while being very, very Jewish, challenged some of that rigidity. And in that way, so the people who tended to embrace that message were the people who were harmed by the system that was so rigid. The people that were condemned or judged or outcast, or disenfranchised because of those rules and stuff like that. They were the ones who found Jesus's message to be sort of a return to the true faith. And then the others, it was, as Peter said, kind of about control. I think you said power, but also control. And so it's, when somebody else comes in and says, hey, there's another way, and people are listening to them and following, like, that's threatening. And so I think that that's part of it. So the next thing, which is a little bit of context as well, is so the first Christians, partially because of Jesus and partly because of the gift of the Spirit, regarded themselves as the true temple, the place where God had made his home. We talk about Christ living in us. And so you don't have to go some particular place to encounter God or Christ, that God's Spirit is loose in the world and that we all have access to God. So you don't have to go through the temple or through the priests to access God. And so we became, I mean, that's in, is it Hebrews? Maybe it's Timothy, Peter. It's, Romans. You're a temple, like your body is a temple. You are a temple of God. And so treat yourself as if that were the case. And so sometimes the people in Jerusalem, the leaders, had called themselves pillars. The early leaders of Christianity in Jerusalem called themselves pillars, but now it's the ordinary Christians in Philadelphia who are to be pillars. So in verse 12, it talks about, if you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will never go out of it. And so now it's not these leaders, it's not these important religious people. It's ordinary Christians are to be pillars. They're to uphold the temple, the faith. Now here's where the context is important. The city of Philadelphia was a city notorious for the danger of earthquakes. So really what you're looking at is, what does it mean to be a pillar in a city that is notorious for earthquakes? What happens in that case? What is the function of a pillar? What will happen to a pillar? And that sort of thing. But then also this is a promise. So the question is, so pillars are the things that they have to be strong because they're there to resist earthquakes. And to hold things up in spite of earthquakes. So why might this have been a promise that the church in Philadelphia would cherish?
So my kind of thought is, it says in verse 12 that making a pillar in the temple, and you never go out of it. I mean, I assume in earthquakes, pillars also crumble. And to say, hey, you will never go out of it means you're not going to crumble, that you will be steadfast, right?
Yep.
Is how I read that, maybe.
Yep. That's it. We can nuance that some more, but that's the basic sort of thing is, you're part of the temple of God, you're part of the body of Christ, and you're not going to crumble no matter what the world, even when the whole world is shaken, you're not going to crumble, which in a very conflicted time and place, I imagine that would be a comfort. So in verse 8, it talks about how Jesus has opened the door right in front of Christians in Philadelphia. He's kind of urging them to go through it. So that the sense is they have this opportunity to not just to stand firm, but to move forward, to make advances, to go through the door. And to take the good news of Christ into places and hearts where it hasn't been yet, to expand and share the gospel. So the question then is, what sorts of open doors is Jesus setting before us today? Whether that's in our own individual lives or in the life of our community of faith here, or, the church, capital C, the broader church.
Well, I think he's opening the doors to the freedom from fear.
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned the tribulation that's coming to all,
Mm-hmm.
and yet he's assuring that the door's open to not fear that.
Mhm.
And it sort of implies that you'll be spared from it, but I'm not sure that's what it specifically says. It just says you don't have to dread and fear it. You will survive it.
Yeah. And move forward. I think it's not just like in your example about death. It's not just, hey, we're going to stand firm in the face of death. It's this, we're going to walk into life. We're going to take steps forward, not just to deny death its power, but to move forward into life as well. That's a great point, George. Peter?
Yeah, when you said that, and I'm not sure what part of our community especially I'm focusing kind of on our Huntsville community, since that's our local community, right? Is I think that God may be opening the doors to parts of our community, but I'm not necessarily sure what parts of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's what we really, that's what we should be watching out for, is what doors is God opening for us to go through to reach those people, to have them in community with us. So
Yeah. I think too, right now, just in terms of the whole church, not just this particular congregation, the pandemic has given us a wide open door, because people's sense of security in the things that we tend to invest our security in has been kind of upended. Like all of a sudden it's we're confronted with so much death and so much pain and so much suffering. And as a culture in the United States, we have managed to sort of ignore death. It's over here. We see it when we have to, but we just sort of pretend it doesn't happen. And in fact, we have whole, portions of our economy devoted to cheating death. Look younger when you buy this cream. We're not growing. Nobody's growing older here. And so, we had this kind of denial of death, and then all of a sudden we were slapped in the face with it, in ways that we really couldn't ignore, although some people still try to. And so, but I think getting back to what George was saying, this promise, this fear from death, I think there's where we as Christians have an opportunity to minister to people, both in terms of caring for those who are grieving, but also offering hope to people that death does not have the final word, that we can respect death. Certainly, we're not asking people to go out and play in traffic, but that there is hope, and we don't need to fear death the way we do, and that in death, death isn't going to be the end. Not just somebody dying, but oftentimes when somebody close to us dies, we sort of die too. And that's normal, that's not going to really be, when we truly can get free from fear of death, then we don't have to be afraid when our loved ones pass away, when when we confront our own mortality. Even I think a lot of the issues with COVID is people looking in the mirror and going, wait a minute, it could happen to me. Like, you don't have to be old, you don't have to be sick. You could just happen, and it's invisible, and there's no way to know it's coming. And it's not like, well, if you get hit by a car and you were running across the street, well, that could happen. It's just sort of, it's so capricious. and random, and human beings do not like those things. But that being able to minister to that we can continue to function in the midst of that. We can continue to grow, and not just grow, we can thrive. We can live in the midst of death. And I think that's a big message that we can and probably should be sharing with the world right now. And some churches are, and some churches have chosen to go the other direction on that. So let's go to the last one. And if one of you all wants to read it, you can, or I can read it. It's up to you all.
Are there any other hard words besides Laodicea?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll read it then. That's fine.
Okay.
And to the angel of the church in Laodicea, write the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the origin of God's creation. I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Therefore, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may be rich, and robes to clothe you and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so you may see. I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice, open the door. I will come into you and eat with you, and you with me. To the one who conquers, I will give a place with me on my throne, just as I myself conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the, I'm assuming the churches, something like
Yes. Oh, sorry. Ah, there you go. Doesn't quite fit. That one word.
Yep.
That's the kind of stuff that irritates me. Anyway. Okay. So often being even-handed and moderate in difficult situations is considered to be a virtue. In fact, in the Presbyterian Church, we talk about how Presbyterians are people of the middle way. So, finding the compromise between, we go down the middle way. So the question, though, is why is that not the case for the church in Laodicea? By the way, this is my favorite of the 7 letters because it is the one that I feel like in just my experience is the most applicable to current life and life in the church and all of those things. I see it a lot. So and I am it a lot. That's so yeah. But that sort of moderation and seeking for compromise is held up as a virtue, but in this case it's what's Jesus is condemning them for. So the question is why is that not the case? Why is it not a virtue for the church in Laodicea? I'm going to go on to the next question, and then it's going to make sense. Like, I think to answer this, I think these are not in the right order. So let me try again. So in year 61 of the Common Era, there was a massive earthquake in this part of Turkey that did major damage to a lot of cities. to the south of Philadelphia. And of those cities, one city was able to refuse imperial help. One city was able to say to the empire, no, we've got this, we don't need your help. Whereas, so, which is a pretty proud thing to do, right? Like, nope, we got it, we're good, we don't need you, we don't need your help. But Laodicea is the one that refused imperial help because they didn't think they needed it. They were rich, they were smug, and it appears that sort of smugness had worn off, rubbed off on the Christians in the town as well. And so they were, well, this passage is talking about, they were really blinded by their riches. They said, I've prospered, I need nothing. I mean, this is like some pretty good self-pride here. And they're blinded to the fact that they are actually pitiable, poor, blind, literally. I mean, that's you're blinded to this and naked. And so let's go back then. That sort of even-handedness, that middle way, that not, taking a stand. While we think of it as peacemaking, sometimes it cannot be. And so why is that not helpful for the church in Laodicea, knowing what we now know about their history and their attitudes?
So to me, I kind of hear it as a self-idolatry type of thing. And they're neither hot nor cold because it's not, they're not on fire for God or against God. They're just, man, I'm all about myself, and so I'm just going to be lukewarm. It's kind of how I interpreted it.
But I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, that's what I hear in there too, sort of this, I'm not anti-God because whatever. I'm not pro-God because I don't think I need to be pro-God. I'm just sort of, I've got what I need. Doesn't really matter which way. This isn't a decision I have to make, kind of thing. Do you have anything, George, you want to add?
No, I'm trying to get away from that being a triad, either lukewarm or freezing cold or burning hot. There's got to be something else. I mean, it's kind of like, well, I guess I'm fighting the disdain for lukewarmness in a way, to be honest. But I know the downsides of that as well, in that you're not putting anything before yourself when you're being lukewarm in that sense. But on the other hand, the question you posed earlier, is it A or is it B? What if it's all of the above?
I think that's a good point. Sometimes we don't see the whole picture, or we get so locked into this way or that way, that we can't really see anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not having any strong messages here because I'm really trying to see what it is I can learn out of this, because it's not resonating with Revelation is not resonating with me so well.
I think, go ahead, Peter.
So the other word that while you and George were speaking that came to my brain was apathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really I don't really care one way or another. And I'll be honest and say, I think you're right, George. It's, at least for me, is like there are definitely some things that I'm hot and some things I'm cold, and it's sort of like, I think for me, it's a kind of depends situation. But I think this is specifically, well, I kind of interpret this as about their need for God, not specific issues or whatnot. But
I kind of think it's a little bit of both, not just their relationship with God, but that's a part of it, right? Their need for God or not, but when that influences the way we live, certainly. And so it's this sort of not just apathy, but sort of self-imposed removal from the things of the life around them. They're able to be apathetic because they don't have to make a choice, and there are a lot of times where people do have to make choices. And so sometimes it's sort of, there's a lot of things going on in the world now, and there are certainly more than a few of them where I just sort of stick my head in the sand and go, I can't. I can't. I'm just going to go over here and pretend that's not actually happening, because I don't have the bandwidth for it. Or I'll acknowledge it's happening, but I don't think I need to do anything about it, or whatever. Or maybe I do need to do something about it, and I just know, and that's kind of what I see in this, at least in my own life, where I sort of run lukewarm, which is, there are things, at the same time recognizing we can't tackle it all, right? We can't tackle it all, but that sort of thing where and sometimes I think I do it with the things I'm being called to tackle to do, like these things that keep showing up again and again and again, and I'm over here going, nope, 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 instead of going, okay, maybe I'm being called to act. What I've always heard in this letter is this sort of sense of this unwillingness to put your money where your mouth is, or really to say anything, and then to this unwillingness to engage in hard things.
Yeah. If I reflect back from what I see in the Gospels, Jesus didn't try to destroy the Jewish church, and he wasn't living a life of sin, and yet he enveloped all of it. He ate with sinners. He socialized in some cases with them. He worshiped in some of the synagogues. He taught in the synagogue. And yet he didn't apparently share the judgment of the Pharisees and Sadducees. I guess it was the Pharisees. So, he was all over the spectrum. It wasn't that he was lukewarm, because he certainly was committed to what he was doing, but he wasn't. Well, throughout these 3 chapters, I've struggled with the word conquer too, because that verb to me leaves losers in the wake, and he didn't go about leaving losers behind him. I'm just,
what they're conquering here is death, not people, not even the people that are being held up as, hey, don't be like them. They're conquering the things that would lead us towards death and not life. So fundamentally, they're conquering the fear of death. So that's where that language is coming in. So it's not as much winners and losers as because it's not about groups of people. So yeah. I think too, there's a sense of where it's like, because Jesus is saying, I wish you were hot or cold, like, but it's decide who you are and be that person. Like, decide, I mean, not that you can't change your mind, but stop trying to play it both ways. Like, when it's convenient, you can be over here doing this, and when it's convenient to do the other thing, you can come over here and do the other thing. Instead of having to, have your own identity and make claims based on that or make choices. So the question is, in what ways are we overly influenced by the attitudes and opinions of those around us?
One more time, please.
Just the throwback, the church in Laodicea, the Christians in Laodicea have adopted the sort of smug, well-off attitude of the town itself, that pretty much the whole townspeople had. And so what ways are we overly influenced by the attitudes and opinions of those around us?
Well, I think our culture is being influenced by a strong trend to polarization. You're here or you're here. And if you're not with me, you're totally you're dead, I guess. I sure couldn't preach on these books, but I'm glad that's not me. Not where my call is.
The lectionary for this Sunday is part of Revelation chapter 1, but it's not the letters, it's the easy part. It's the Alpha and Omega business. So I've preached on the church in Laodicea, though, the letter there before a couple of times, I think, along the way. Piggybacking on what George said, a lot of that polarization comes from this increasing focus on individuals, like on individuality, that what matters is me, mine, what I believe, what I want to do, what my choices are, what makes me comfortable, what makes me happy, and everything is, it's all an individual choice. And we've forgotten that our individual choices have impacts on other people and on a community. Like communities are made up of individuals, but it's a community. And so we've kind of lost the forest for the trees in some sense. Which makes it easy to polarize, because if we're that individualistic, it's easy to see other people as not part of us because they're their own people too. And I tell people often, because I hear these things about my personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and that's not, Christianity was never intended to be your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It is a community endeavor. It's not something, certainly we interact with Christ on our own and have disciplines of, spiritual disciplines that we engage with Christ in, but you don't do Christianity alone. It's impossible, because we're called first to engage the world. So you can't just sit in your own little bubble and whatever. But two, in order to follow Christ, you have to recognize that you are part of a community and live as part of a community. You can't, it's not something people do on their own. It's not an individual belief system. It's a way of life that is based in community. which is why the greatest two commandments are love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I see that individualism a lot, and I think it seeps its way into churches too, quite a bit, and that polarization and that sort of thing. And we, you know, it's sort of that hot, cold versus lukewarm business. Like, we need to be able to say, here is what I believe, but also be in community with people who believe differently. And at the same time, recognizing that there are times where we cannot be in community with people who believe differently because it has become harmful, either to us or to the group. So, but yeah, I think that that's a big thing. The current cultural and political climate is definitely infiltrating churches, and churches are jumping on board with it. And that's sad to me, but it's also kind of scary to watch. I get real nervous when the government co-ops churches and churches co-op the government. That typically just doesn't end well for anyone. So what does it mean to you? So we're down to verse 20. Listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come into you and eat with you and you with me. So what does it mean to you that Jesus would come and sit down and have a meal with those who hear his voice?
Okay, I know you just talked about it's not about the personal relationship with Jesus, but that's where I think about the personal relationship with Jesus. But it's kind of what I hear in that context, that it is not just a communal relationship with Jesus, it is that personal relationship with Jesus. And I forget however many long ago, Christy, when you preached on I think it was with or pronouns of Jesus, or I forget what the sermon
was, but
yes. But you talked about Jesus being with us, and that's another part that I really think about from that.
That was years ago. It's been at least 2 years. I think about it, what I hear in that is this sort of promise of accessibility.
Promise of which?
Accessibility.
Okay,
like,
yes.
You don't have to go far, you don't have to jump through hoops. You don't have to, go on a scavenger hunt for Jesus. You're standing at the door knocking. Open it. Like, you got to listen for the knock. We moved into the new house. We don't have a doorbell right now. We have one of those smart doorbell things, but we haven't hooked it up yet because that requires engineering that we have not had time to do. And so we don't know when somebody has left something at the door. So packages arrive and they go to our front door and we don't know that they're there, which is 90% of the time fine. But for reasons beyond me, the people who leave the packages on the door, the delivery people, leave them like half on the porch and then half hanging over the steps, when if they would just put them back in the corner, then they wouldn't get wet when it rains. So like tomorrow, we know there's a package coming. We are going to be extra observant. We've started doing things like every hour, when we know something's coming, just go out and open the door and make sure it's not there yet, or see if it is, because we don't see it and there's nothing to alert us to the fact that it's there. I think about that sort of in this sense of, Jesus is coming, he's there. Are we paying enough attention to hear him knocking? And then are we not so caught up in our own to-do list that we can answer the door? And when we do that, he's right there. He'll come in, he'll sit with us. We will sit with him. There's not some big magic formula. It's not, It's not as hard as we make it sometimes.
Yeah, I think that expanding that point a little bit is it's not as hard as we make it sometime. And in fact, that's what it's all about, is it shouldn't be hard.
Mhm.
You know, there may be some personalities that you just know of, but you don't have any relationship with them. And you think maybe they would, they're probably, admirable people. But if they came in and sat down and said, hey, let's chat for a while, you might be a little intimidated. And then there are others in the same thing. You've probably never met them before, but you know of them.
Mhm.
And you'd feel quite comfortable for them to just come in and, be easy to smile, and
Yeah.
you'd be comfortable. And I think that's what we're being welcomed there, is that, they're at the door, you let them in, and there's, in this case, if it's Jesus, who's the personification of perfect living, it doesn't have to be intimidating to those of us who are not perfect. That's what it's all about. And I didn't get that out of this chapter.
You have anything to add, Peter?
I don't think so. I guess the only, I think, George, one of the, just to add on a little bit, I think, Christy, I think you mentioned to-do lists and busyness. And I do think, George, that sometimes I'll say even myself and whoever, I don't want to open the door because I am naked, I'm wretched, I'm, a sinner, and that can be hard too sometimes, right?
Oh yeah, like when somebody shows up and
And you run to change the channel before they come in.
well, or my favorite is they ring the doorbell and you just got out of the shower, but you really need to go answer it. But you just got out of the shower, and so you're kind of racing around, grabbing your robe and drying off and that sort of thing. Worse yet, what seems to happen to me is about the time I get in the shower and soaked up, something happens that requires my immediate attention, or the phone call I've been waiting on for 3 hours comes through. And now it's like, okay, I'm soapy, I'm naked, I'm wet, like I can't do anything about it. And yet here you are. So yeah, that's a good point too, Peter. Let's let me actually, I'm gonna connect some dots here and draw some things. There's some commonalities in this letter. They're addressing particular situations in particular churches. I want you to hear that in both sequences, there was a church that seemed to be having it right and was told, keep doing what you're doing. There's this, let anyone who has an ear listen to what Spirit is saying to the churches. So that's not just, hey, these churches listen, it's everyone listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And then also they all start the same way. I know your works. This isn't just about right belief. It's about faithful action. So we could sit here all day long and say, I believe in Christ, I believe this, I believe that. But what is happening here is Jesus is saying, how is that influencing your living though? That should make a particular difference in how you live. I know your works. It's not that our works get us into heaven or would save us, but if we are truly in a relationship with Christ, that will come out in our works. We will be compelled to those works, and our faith will be demonstrated in them. And so it's this. So all of these churches are sort of being reminded, along with us, that it's not what you say, it's what you do. And the way people are going to see you is based on what you do. It's sort of, they say in therapy and counseling things a lot, when a couple of things, one of which is when somebody shows you who they are the first time, believe them. But also, there's this, when people say one thing and they do another, that's a form of gaslighting and manipulation. And what you're supposed to look for is what they do, not what they say, because people will say all kinds of things, but what they do, they'll do all kinds of things too, but what they do, the things we do are more reflective of what we believe than the things we say. And so Jesus is sort of reminding the churches and us that your faith is going to be lived out. Your works are the witness. So we can see into your heart through your works to some degree. Your works are what reveals your true faith. And so I just think that's a really important reminder. It's one of the things that ties some of this is formulaic language from a literary perspective, but it also adds some meaning of, faith is not divorced from the way you live in the world. And the way we live is a reflection of our faith, and we need to remember that and believe and live accordingly. So I'm going to pray, and then we can stop recording and talk about any personal prayer requests we might have. So let us pray. Loving God, we have all fallen short of our calling as Christians. We have failed to renew our trust in God's promises to us. As we reflect on the incompleteness of our works, the blindness of ourselves and our world, we ask that you would open our eyes, that you would give us ears to hear, that you would give us the conviction and commitment to not only know your love, but to live it. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Hey, Christy, before I stop the recording, are we having a study next week?
We are not having Bible study next Wednesday.
I didn't think so, but just for anybody who might be watching online afterwards, that they're aware of it.
We'll resume the week after Thanksgiving.
All right, thank you. I'll stop the recording now.